Welcome again, everybody, to Ham Radio Perspectives. I am Quinn, K8QS.
And I'm Tom, WA9TDD.
Tom, this is a great topic. How do the HF, high-frequency bands, really work? I was thinking about this yesterday, driving with my grandson in the car from West Michigan here to Chicago to go to a Chicago Cubs game at Wrigley Field, the friendly confines, as Ernie Banks used to say. And we had to get off one of the roads we were on because of some construction or something. And we're going through a residential area. And it occurred to me that I knew nothing about that area. I didn't know what the people there were like. I didn't know if it was noisy at night. I didn't know where you would go to get something to eat in any particular place that was good. It was all out there somewhere. And you can look at a map and not know much about a neighborhood, okay? Just like you can look at a ham rig and see what band you're on, but not understand how the bands work.
That's right.
And the only way really beyond what we're going to do right now is to have experience. So after a while, you become kind of intimate with the way the bands work, and you know which band to go on given time of the day or year, sunspot, whatever. And so it becomes part of you. But when I talk with new hams who are starting to get into HF, they don't know what band to get on. They have no idea how these things work. So I thought we should do a little intro on how the HF bands really work. Okay, Tom?
Okay. So, speaking of a high frequency HF radio propagation, that's generally driven primarily by the Earth's ionosphere. And that's a region of the upper atmosphere that is ionized by solar radiation. The ionosphere consists of different layers. There's a D layer, the E layer, and the F layer that absorbs, that refracts, which is bending, or passes radio waves depending on the time of day, the season, and the 11-year solar cycle. So here's how propagation behaves across the specific HF bands you listed.
Okay, so what I did here is to put down the main ones I thought we should cover, and then I'll start out talking about this in terms of 160 meters, which is 1.8 to 2 megahertz, 160 meters. You may never go there to operate. You may not have an antenna for it because it takes quite an antenna. But you should also know there's an easy way to figure out how this band works, and that is it's very close to the AM broadcast band, or we often call medium wave. So if you've ever done any DXing on an AM radio, especially at night, tuning around for AM radio stations, distant stations, you know a couple of things. First of all, daytime, you are not going to hear distant stations at all. The lowest layer of the ionosphere, that D layer, is highly active during the day, and it completely absorbs these low frequency signals on 160. So communication is really limited to what we call ground wave, going along the ground rather than going up and being bounced back down. So usually it maxes out at 50 miles or so, unless you have super duper power like they do on some of the AM stations, the old stations that we like to listen to. Nighttime, that D layer dissipates after sunset. And that's why if you're out in your car at night and you got the AM radio on and you're tuning around a little bit for DX at night, it allows signals to travel higher to the F layer and bounce back to Earth. So suddenly the band 160 meters is open. Nighttime really is the thing here. Now, the characteristics, it's also susceptible to atmospheric noise. 160 meters can be very, very noisy. You can have an S6, S7 noise level, particularly in the summer, that is just the way it's going to be. And then thunderstorms, kaboom, kaboom, kaboom. If you're wearing headphones, you're not going to be a happy camper. And the colder winter months, and of course you got a longer nighttime too, that's the best time for 160 meters. And so check it out.
Okay, that brings us down next to 80 meters. That's 3.5 to 4.0 megahertz. And that also includes what's called 75 meters, which is essentially the phone band. But 80 meters is the ultimate band for nighttime regional networking and rag chewing. During the day, like 160 meters, signals are heavily absorbed by the D layer. However, is an excellent band for NVIS, that's near vertical incident skywave propagation, providing reliable continuous regional coverage out about 250 miles. But at nighttime, like the 160 meters, the D
Right.
layer absorption disappears, turning 80 meters into really a powerhouse for transcontinental and intercontinental DX. Characteristically, it can be quite noisy during the summer due to static crashes, lightning, so on. But winter nights offer exceptionally clear DX conditions.
Yeah, and by nights there, Tom, we should say also early in the morning, just before the sun comes up.
Just before sunrise, yes.
Yeah, and that's where interesting, like here in Michigan, where I can hear the New Zealanders and so on. So it's great. Now, 40 meters, you're probably familiar with it, 7 to 7.3 megahertz, at least for U.S. operators with certain privileges where CW and all is. 40 meters is often called, and I agree with this, the workhorse of the HF spectrum because it is so popular and useful 24 hours a day. So we've gone from 160 to 80 to 40. Now we're to a band, unless there are other things happening that would get in the way, is normally good for operation during the day and at night. The daytime, the D layer causes some absorption, but not like on 80 and 160. The signals are high enough in frequency to punch through and bounce off that F layer, which is higher, and then come down, providing excellent regional and medium distance communication. So what you normally hear under normal conditions during the day on 40 meters is stations out about 300 to 500 miles. Well, at nighttime, that changes. As the D layer again fades, the skip distance lengthens out, 40 meters opens up for worldwide DX, or if you're interested in intracontinental, let's say across Canada, across the US, that kind of thing, it becomes quite good. Characteristic-wise, it's less affected by the extreme lows sunspot cycle, which we'll be talking about. And we're moving into a solar minimum now, so 40 meters will still be there. There'll be some days where, for other reasons we'll talk about, it'll not work so well. But 40 meters, that's the workhorse. If you want to just tune in, see what's going on, medium distance during the day, longer distance at night, first go to 40 meters. Whatever kind of mode you're using makes no difference.
Yeah. And that brings us next to 30 meters, which is 10.1 to 10.15 megahertz, a very narrow slice of the band because it's a shared frequency with other radio services, but it's often considered a sweet spot for propagation. And this is like my favorite band for digital. The 30 meter band, like I said, 10.1 to 10.15 megahertz, behaves like a hybrid between the 20 meter and 40 meter bands. And the band is really nice for my work as digital because that's all that's allowed there. There's no sideband, there's no AM. It's either digital or CW. So there's not a lot of extraneous QRM going on the band. Daytime propagation-wise, during the day, the skip distance is a bit longer than 40 meters, making it an excellent for reliable regional and domestic contacts. It's high enough in frequency to avoid the heavy daytime D-layer signal absorption that often heavily impacts 40 and 80 meters. Nighttime propagation.
Just to give us, before you go to nighttime on this one, Tom, since you're the operator on this band and I'm not, if you were to get on today with digital on 30 meters, what kind of distance would you expect to connect with?
It depends on the mode. Now, I find FT8 on 30 meters is pretty much transcontinental. If you follow the gray line, then you get into some European DX and into Southeast Australia.
Okay, let's talk about the gray line for 1 second then.
Okay.
Because some people don't know what the gray line is. And why don't you go ahead and explain that, or I can if you don't want to.
Okay. The gray line happens when the sun passes out of a region before it passes out of one region, before it passes out of the next region, on the Earth. And along that gray line,
Up
because of the
north and south.
absorption, north and south, because of the decline and delayer absorption, provides a very good path between international DX on either side of that gray line. So it's very interesting.
Yeah. So if the sun is going down or coming up near you, there's a sweet spot there,
Right.
which you'll find on 30 and the higher bands we're talking about here, where you can especially communicate north and south, where the sun is going up, going down, and that of course that's moving along to the west.
Right. And back to your original question, FT8 is pretty much transcontinental within the United States and Canada, into Mexico, northern Mexico. I find that JS8 call is a very interesting mode because it's more regionalized. I find that most of the operation is between the East Coast, the Mississippi River, from southern Canada down to about Tennessee. It's really strange. I don't know if that's due to propagation or if it's maybe there's just not any users in any area other than that. So
yeah, and let's just
I find
specify
that rather
here.
curious.
You're talking about that from your home in the summer, which is southern Indiana.
Correct. Right. We'll see how it works out in the winter from Florida. But I find it really curious. And what I even find more curious, if you overlay the propagation with JSA call to the last major glaciation we had, the two maps overlap. So I don't know if it has anything to do with the soil condition or not. But that's just an aside. But pressing on to the nighttime propagation on 30 meters, after the sun goes down, the bands opened up beautifully for long distance DX contacts. Unlike 20 meters, which can be completely closed at night, depending on the solar cycle, 30 meters tends to stay open almost all night year round. It has a very low noise floor. I measure a noise floor of about F2. That's out here in a rural area. I don't know how that compares to a urban area. And it is much less susceptible to atmospheric noise and summer thunderstorm static, QRN, than the lower 40 and 80 meter bands. And the modes of operation, because it's a very narrow work band, only 50 kilohertz wide, sideband transmission is generally not permitted. The band is a haven exclusively for CW and digital modes like FT8, Whisper, PSK31, and what I mentioned before, JS8 call.
So, Tom, just to clarify this, you're not hearing any sideband signals from other parts of the world either.
No. If I look on, even if I go to PSK Reporter and sort for all modes, I don't see any sideband activity whatsoever.
Okay, so this is international.
Right.
Okay, let's go to 20 meters. I have a love-hate relationship with 20 meters. It's from 14.0 to 14.35 megahertz. And Tom, when you and I were growing up in Chicago, I always knew that during the daytime, 20 meters would be wonderful, and there would be some DX there because it's really the old-time premier DX band. If you want to talk on the other side of the world on any given day, usually you can do it on 20 meters. We'll talk a little bit about day or nighttime and all, but so that's the way it was. The problem was, even though it's a pretty broad band, you would get a lot of people with big honking antennas and big honking amplifiers on 20 meters, including those folks, Tom, we used to call the California kilowatts, which we would hear because we're in the Midwest and they're in California. And who knows what they're running, but man, they could blast you right out of there. And there were so many of these big guns, and it was often so hard to find a frequency on 20 meters that I kind of gave up on it. I do a little bit of it now if the band is not too crowded, especially during the day. So daytime, it consistently open for long distance communication. This is the first band as we're going up the frequencies here. The F layer easily refracts 20-meter signals, providing the skip distances of several hundred to several thousand miles. And it's crazy because you can be hearing somebody that is 400 miles away, and all of a sudden you hear on adjacent frequency somebody that's 1,000 miles away, 1,500 miles away. And you say, boy, what's happening here? How many bounces to the signal and so on? At nighttime, the peak of the solar cycle period, we're past that now, but 20 meters can remain open around the clock. It's wild. During solar minimums, we're moving into it typically closes shortly after sunset. In fact, I used to think about this as a kid in Chicago, operating, as a novice and then a general class license, to forget 20 meters at night unless the solar activity is really, really great. So what about the characteristic then to summarize this up? It features a highly noticeable, let's just call it a skip zone. Stations closer than a few hundred miles might be entirely inaudible. We're not talking ground wave here because the signal is bouncing over them, while stations 3,000 miles, when conditions are good, can come in crystal clear. And then, of course, there may be pileups if it's fairly rare DX. So that's 20 meters.
So, well, how about 17 meters?
Yeah, I want to take 17 too, because it is probably now my favorite band. For a long time, 10 meters, when 10 is open, boy, it's my favorite band. But 17, I'm coming to like it. It's between 18.068, crazy, and 18.168 megahertz. Not a lot of frequency range there, but I can always find a spot on 17. It's almost always that there are people on there, and some of them like to rag chew, and it's really a great band. It's one of those, we debated whether or not to cover it because it's one of those so-called WARC bands from the World Administrative Radio Conference, where they allocated it in 1979, long after we were licensed. And it's by international agreement that contesting is not allowed there. So if you want to get away from a contest on a given day, you can try going to 17 meters. And it's really a relaxed band for DXing. I got on 2 days ago about 5 p.m. and there were 2 European stations on. One was Hungary. No, I'm sorry. There was one guy on in Hungary and one guy down in South America, in Brazil, and nobody else on the band. And they were just sitting there calling CQ and then QRZ, and people were working them. It was fun. So daytime, it behaves similarly to 20 meters, but requires slightly higher levels of solar activity to fully open up. And when it's open, look out. You got low noise, and even during the day, and it's fantastic. Now, nighttime on 17 meters, it almost always closes shortly after sunset, though with the solar maximum, it can stay open. And I've been on there working Japan after the sun has gone down a couple years ago when we had a higher level on the solar activity. So the characteristics here, remember, it sits between 20 meters we talked about and 15 that we're now going to talk about. It's kind of a great swing band between those two. If 20 meters is crowded or 15 hasn't quite opened yet, go to 17. It's a sweet spot.
Right, and that brings us logically to 15 meters, and that's a fantastic daytime DX band that's heavily reliant on the solar cycle. And I noticed...
What's the frequency range for that, Tom?
Oh, frequency range for that is 21.0 to 21.45 megahertz. So it's a very wide band. But I noticed that it closes up early in the evening, more so than 20 meters. But during the daytime, during the middle and peak of the solar cycle, 15 meters of spectacular worldwide propagation with very little noise. It requires higher solar flux ionization than 20 meters to open, but when it does, signals are incredibly strong. Nighttime, it generally closes in the early evening, shortly after the sun goes down, though it can occasionally stay open late in the night during the absolute peak of the solar maximums. Now, the characteristics of the band during the solar minimums, this band can be largely dead for long periods, making it highly dependent on the sun's 11-year rhythm.
And I would say, Tom, even when the sunspots are good, the band is underutilized.
Yes.
There's so much frequency there, and so few operators when 15 meters is even rocking and rolling. It blows my mind. Not as much as with 10 meters, but it's a similar kind of thing. Okay, let's go to 10 meters. We're talking about HF, so we won't go beyond that. 10 meters is huge, 28.0 to 29.7 megahertz, and the FM operation on that band is up higher. Lower end, you're going to hear the digital modes. You're going to hear CW. And then when you get up around the so-called calling frequency, 28.4, you're going to start hearing some sideband. And the thing is that the band can be fully open. As we've talked about, you can check it if you don't want to check it any other way. A simple way, just go down the lower end of the band where the digital signals are. What frequency would that be? 28.07?
21 point
28.
28.120.
120. Okay. And just tune down there. And if you hear those things coming in, 5, 6, 7 S units or more, the band is open. And you can try going up on FM or up on sideband or CW and get it going. Now, it sits at the very top, the very end here, we're talking about of the HF spectrum. So it's highly erratic. And there's a kind of magic tied to this band. And it relates particularly to the solar cycle, but also, the solar cycle every 11 years or so, or it goes up and then comes down again. But in between, it can just take off. And you can also hear what's the sporadic E. The sporadic E can operate. And suddenly, one evening, you're tuning around 10 meters and there are all these signals. And you say, what the heck is going on? It's so much fun. During the solar minimums, the band is largely dead for traditional F-layer skywave propagation. So it's mostly line of sight and ground wave. And there are a fair number of nets, local nets that get on there. And sometimes the band will start getting open and you'll hear these local nets in other parts of the country. During the solar maximums, 10 meters rocks and rolls. Not the same amount every day, but look out, gang. This is such a fun band. I told the story in one of the other videos. I worked this kid who had a converted 100 milliwatt CB rig, converted for 10 meters, and he's operating on his bicycle, riding around, licensed hand guy, and I'm working him from Chicago on AM with low power and his low power. So because the frequency is so high, signals experience virtually no D-layer absorption. So you can easily work the entire globe using very low power and simple small antennas. It is strictly a daytime band, opening at sunrise and closing around sunset, unless weird conditions are happening, like sporadic E, which they can. So in some, the characteristics in the summer months, even during solar minimums, 10 meters frequently experiences these sporadic E's. Look around for that. Look on PSK Reporter. See if you see somebody coming in here on 10 meters unexpectedly because of where the solar activity is. These are highly localized, highly ionized clouds in the E layer that cause sudden, intense, short-lived band openings. This can be minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes coming in. Strong communication, let's say 500 to 1,500 miles, and then it's gone. It's like 6 meters, which we're not talking about. Well, what we've tried to do here, gang, is go through these bands in a way that will help you understand, not just technically how the propagation works, but also to get a sense. So you're not like me when I'm driving to Wrigley Field with my grandson. And I have to get off the road and go through a neighborhood and I feel like I'm lost. I don't know which direction to go. I don't know where to go to eat. I don't know anything. And that's sometimes how, when you get your ticket, your license, you feel about all these HF bands, when to use them. And so check them out in terms of our tips. And we think that you'll have more fun doing that. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. Please give us a thumbs up if you like this. Please subscribe to our channel, Ham Radio Perspectives. Tom and I love to serve you with these kinds of videos that are helpful for especially people that don't know much about ham radio yet, because we've together been in it about 160 years. Almost 120, I guess.
120.
Yeah, okay. 73, everybody. I'm Quinn, K8QS.
I'm Tom, WA9TDD.
73.